Hey folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. It's 11 o'clock Central Texas time. You've heard that before. You know what? I had to up my intro game. Why? Because Steve Staggs deserves it, right? You know, he needs something fresh happening, right? Folks, I'll tell you what, this is going to be a really good time because we're here. We're hanging out. It is Friday, November 3rd. And I'll tell you what, we need Jesus more than we ever could have imagined, man. And I'm just so thankful that you're here. Um, when you have a breakthrough, and of course, it seems like every time I talk to Steve with you guys on this stream, like my mind gets blown. But he always talks about this like 24 to 48 hour or 72-hour thing is that when you have these things that blow your mind, you see them then in action. And if you think about good education, what's good education? I remember having good teachers in school, and they would say, hey, we're going to learn this principle, we're going to learn this idea, but then we're going to practice it, right? And it seems like in the context of this created order that also is the case, and that we see that happening. Like we go, oh, I learned that, and then I'm like, oh, I see that in real life, and then I experience it, and it drives it home. And that's the cool thing. That's how you kind of can see the truth in all of this, is that it resonates beyond just, oh, that's a really nice story, thanks a lot, and now it's like, boom, wow, you're going to practice this. Well, some of these things that we end up practicing aren't very comfortable, and that's going to be the theme of today. But let's invite Steve, the man of the hour. What's up, Steve?
Hello there, my friend. How are you doing?
You know what? I'm actually doing well. I don't know if you can pick up on my energy, but I'm pretty I had a call it's one of those things where you get connected with people that you haven't connected with before, and it's so energizing because you're like, okay, I didn't coordinate this at all. I didn't know this person, and this is like the perfect person to meet. And it's like, thank you, Lord, you're good, and you're working all these things behind the scene, and you're obviously out in front. You're strategic, and we need to follow you. And it's like, this is how He makes our path straight. That's how it feels to me, at least.
Well, yeah. I mean, I remember years and years ago, I heard a guy describe life with Jesus as high adventure.
Yeah.
And I have never found a better way of describing it. Man, it is high adventure.
High jinks. That's so great. High adventure. I love that. Well, let's say hello to the chat, Steve. We got quite a few people here this morning. Hexonium is saying, hey, he's talking about a guy named Mark Mallet, it looks like. Look at US Grace Force stream. Cool. Yeah, check that out, man. Thanks so much for that. Mike Ostell's back. That's always a good sign, right? The indicator.
This is getting depressing.
Yeah. But it's good to have Jesus as well, as y'all get great friends. Hopefully we can pick you up and encourage you and give you a shot of hopium, I suppose, today. Just hope in the Lord Jesus, because that's, yeah. I got my shot this morning, so we're in good shape. But Mike, thanks for being here. We're with you, even if we're not present with you. We're with you in bearing all of these things. You're not alone. I think that's the number one thing. And
Absolutely.
then Sam Kemp getting on the road, going to catch the rerun. Have a blessed day. Thanks so much for being here. Or a bleeded day, Sam. Thanks for that. Identity blocks, dude. Okay, so here's what's cool. So ID has been in like all my streams. Like, it's been so fantastic to have you here. And so identity blocks have been in our community like forever, OG of OGs. And I hadn't seen them in maybe it was a different handle, but just to have you here, seeing you in all these streams, I really appreciate you being here. I mean, these streams, Steve, are not for everyone, and that's always, the lowest viewed of all of the things that I do are this, but I also recognize that I'm not really doing this for the number of viewers as much as I am for documenting this journey. And I honestly, I think about my kids, and potentially grandkids, when I think about this, is like, we're documenting something, and it's called real life. I feel like a form of discipleship, a form of like hanging out, talking about Jesus is good for the bones.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, I get it.
David Lee is here, as usual, all the way from southwestern Indiana. David Lee, really loved, by the way. I talked to him earlier, and he was like, man, Steve talking about all this moving stuff, and I'm in the process of moving, and how like amazing it was to hear those stories. And I think that was a big encouragement to him, Steve.
Awesome.
So Emaciated's here, and then Anthony Munoz. You don't know Anthony Munoz, but Brandon believes that this guy is the youngest billionaire in the history of the world.
Oh, wow. Really?
Maybe not yet, but we're believing that for him. No,
So he's 12 years old and about to
yes,
get on the
yeah.
map, huh?
Well, no, he's a super guy. Anthony Munoz Brandon's such a big fan, and he's just been so supportive. So good to see you, Anthony
Awesome.
Munoz. We always give him, but I think what's so cool. The reason I continue this thing about Anthony Munoz being this billionaire. I have found in my life, I could count on one hand, Steve, the number of people that looked me in the eye and said, "I think you're great and you can do it."
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
One hand, and
Wow.
probably less than five times.
Yeah.
And it's like those people, think about this. How many times have you looked a young person in the eye and said, "You know what? I see something in you and you can do it. I believe in you." Have you ever had a situation like that, Steve? Can you think about like how it's not a common thing? And I think that's why God invented grandparents, in my opinion. Like that's what you should do if you're a grandparent. Look your grandkids in the eye and be like, "I believe in you." Are you in the same situation as me? I mean, did you have people in your life who were just absolutely for you and fans of you and built into you and encouraged you and were edifying to you? I didn't.
Wow. It's interesting you mentioned that because I've never even thought about it. But as you were describing and prepping your question, I was going back in the Rolodex of time and boy, man, I would be hard pressed to find anybody or to recall. Um, but hey, I'm gonna continue giving a thought here, and if somebody comes to mind, I'm gonna give them a shout out.
Yeah, well, and
Uh,
you've mentioned in the past, I think, when it came to baseball, your parents or your mom or somebody was like, they didn't keep you from going out and playing baseball in the yard, and you know, but I guess what I'm getting at is the reason I do this with Anthony Munoz is because, and I do this with my own son. I think about this when I wake him up in the morning. So I go in there and wake him up, and it's funny. I give my wife a hard time because her way of waking people up is turn on the lights and be like, "Get out of bed." She's like the drill sergeant, and of course, I don't like waking up that way. So I kind of creep in there. I turn on the closet light instead of the main light. I don't want to like totally fry his retina. And I'll go over and sit on his bed and I'll rub his back and I'll be like, "What's up?" And I was thinking about this. I was like, why do I do that? I'm doing that because that's what I wanted when I was a kid. My dad was always at work and around. I was thinking, like, is somebody really for me? Is
yeah,
somebody a fan of mine? Is somebody like, no matter what, I'm in your court? And I feel like, why do I talk about Jesus with you? Because that's who he said he is to me,
yeah,
what's interesting about it is we have so many tapes that we play in our minds of what people have said to us, and that's going to be part of the theme of today is the
yeah,
voices that we're listening to, and they're not just the devil with a pitchfork and horns and a red spandex suit,
yeah,
but
yeah,
there's all of these spirits of things that are speaking to us a lie.
yeah,
And so part of the reason I do this with Andy Munoz is we believe in you, buddy. It's the same thing with Mike Costello. Come on, Mike, we're with
yeah,
you.
yeah. Right on, right on. I had in my era, and there's all kinds of shows and stuff like that about it. Um, we didn't talk a lot about about stuff. It was kind of the
Yeah.
kids are seen and not heard kind of a thing, and um, nose to the grindstone kind of those things. But um, my dad was a man of few words. I mean, the entirety of his training on how to handle finances, for example, was to live within your means.
Pretty good
Well,
one.
I had absolutely no idea what that meant.
Yep.
What do you mean, live within your means? And that now those were a few words. There was a lot packed in there, but for a kid, I had absolutely no idea what that meant. You know, And for years, I didn't know what it meant. But one of the things about my dad was that he never missed one of my games.
Yeah.
I was playing ninth grade C football, 10th grade B football. It'd be freezing cold, raining, and he would be literally the only person in the stands watching me play. So though he wasn't very verbose in his encouragement and the way you asked your question, but his presence was 100%, that way. Um, I remember when I was in ninth grade, I received when I was the baseball coach, you know, I won most valuable player. And when I was coming up to receive the award, he said, "This young man has an opportunity similar to what I had, which was to be able to one day play professional baseball."
Okay, that's one you can mark off right there.
Yeah, and it was like, whoa, what?
Wow.
Wow, somebody, and his name was Jim Musburger, and he was Wolfsburger, excuse me. And during practice, he used to get on the mound. He'd say, "Okay, if one of you can even touch one of my pitches, you don't even have to hit it fair, just touch it, then you don't have to run laps." Well, guess what? And then
You
he
hit
would
him
up
up with
the
that.
ante. If any one of you can do it, then nobody has to run laps.
Whoa.
Well, I would routinely drive him deep, you know, which was not only did I make contact, I had the physical ability to actually, take him to task, which
Wow.
was all part of the fun.
Yeah.
And so, to hear that was tremendous. Um, and so, yeah, there. If I give some thought, there are some people hidden way back there, but it was not, is not, unfortunately, a common thing,
Yeah.
which
And
I
I
think
think
is what your point is.
yeah, yep. And I think and there's a balance, right? There's a balance between, "Oh, Johnny, you're the greatest. You're gonna be the greatest of all time, and you're gonna be a great singer," and, Johnny's tone deaf, and, let's not lie to people, but
Right.
let's also point out and, breathe life into people.
Yeah,
That's the
right
thing I
on.
feel like is so, you know, and part of that makes me feel like this idea that love covers a multitude of sins. There's something you're like, you know what? When it's true love that's being expressed, these other things disappear or at least washed away. And so it's a part of this whole theme of today. Actually, I want to get your thoughts on. But Alan's
Yes.
here. Hello, let's go.
Yep.
Absolutely. Carter Hill, of course, is here. He loves the high adventure of it all. I know you guys have been journeying along in this process of high adventure as well. So
Yeah.
good to see you here. Um, Look at that, Carter Hill. Look at he's. Yep, I believe in you, and you can do it. By the way, Jesus believes in you, and you can do it. That includes everyone on the stream. Amen. That's good. He's practicing it.
Right
Um,
on.
that is awesome. And then there's Anthony Munoz. Been watching since episode 1. Big thanks to Heartbeat and Mr. Staggs for opening my eyes to the spiritual area of life. Wow, Anthony Munoz.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that you're watching.
Yes.
I mentioned in the green room to Steve that when we were talking, I said, you don't know what the impact of this stuff is unless you kind of get an echo in the canyon. So I appreciate the echo in the canyon from Anthony Munoz that there are people who, I look at the stats and I see that people are watching, but this is a lot to consume and it's a lot to think about, and not everybody has that kind of time. So Steve said many times, "Hey, if you got some interest, it's not what we say, it's what Jesus helps you understand." Right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of words out there, but the things that penetrate inside are not of our efforts. So thanks so much for that, Anthony. I really
Yes.
appreciate that. Um, so let me get into this. I had a really rough week, Steve, and you know some of that. Um, but what really came out of that was I see all the time, right? Once you see it, you can't unsee it. So let me kind of set the stage and really get your thoughts on this because this is huge. And I think anyone that watches this can relate to this. What I've come to relate to over this last year is that if Jesus is alive and he speaks, and he's strategic and he is out front, and that we are the branches and he's the vine, and without him we can do nothing, and he only does what he hears the Father doing, and he is literally, speaking, and he sees us as sons, right, as an heir, and we are Elohim man with him, right, and we're an extension of him, and in the ideal set of structure of his nature and character, that when we are in this process of walking with him, holding each thought captive moment to moment, not just in a quiet time with coffee, but in all of life, that when it says it will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus, it's true. And what is the guarding that is happening? Well, what I have seen, and this is the way I would articulate it, is imagine the air in this room is sewage mixed with feces.
Hmm.
And we're literally imagine you're underwater, you can breathe the feces that are in the water. And we're in this thick, disgusting. You get to a certain point, your nose blind, and you don't even see it.
Yeah.
And you're in this cesspool. And what you don't realize, and I said it on the last stream, that there are ways in which things get in. I think about viruses. They can get in through your eyes. You rub your eyes with dirty hands, or it comes through your nose, your mouth, or your ears. There are places where it can infest you. And we think about this spiritually as what we're listening to. And of course, we pick up on these things in a lot of different ways. What I've recognized is that there's a lot of voices, and I don't mean audible voices, but there are a lot of narratives that I'm listening to that are not Jesus.
Yeah.
And what I've realized is the whole concept of action and proaction, right? This idea that I'm reacting to something is that I have this choice. And you said the other day, you said that choices are these seeds of this creation, right? They actually are these seeds that grow into something, which totally makes sense when it comes to the wages of sin is death, right? Who are you paying, right? Who's paying
Yeah.
you? Who are you working for? And what I recognized over this last week of going through a very, very difficult time is I felt very, very weak. And I felt very, very easily blown around by these spirits and voices of things that were not of him.
Yeah.
And I realized I felt very weak, Steve. I felt like I've got no self control. I've got no ability to manage this. And now I know that's not true, but I was listening like lie after lie after lie. And some of those coming directly from myself, some of those spirits, I want to define what that is, right? Because one of the things I notice in you, Steve, and you're like, hey, I've been doing this for a while, is what I admire is your steadiness and I admire your patience. And to me, that obviously isn't by accident.
Mhm.
And so, as somebody that is wired as emotionally as I am, and I love the great enthusiasms, and I love being in the arena, but also I feel like I can get knocked over easily. How do you? I know that's a lot, but I wanted to tee that up as really the theme for at least this first hour.
Yeah. Well, what you're describing, and I think it's right. Anyone who starts um, putting their toe in the pond of the game, if you will, anyone who actually starts getting in the game will experience the things that you're talking about. I mean, life all by itself um, is built around adversity, and so we all experience that at some level. Now, we usually give more clinical kinds of answers or descriptions about it, particularly in today's world. There's a name and a term for everything. Um, I remember, by way of example, the Lord took me through a period of about 15 years where every time I turned around, I found myself counseling somebody. And I wasn't interested in doing that. You know, Yes, I recognize that Jesus has called me to do some teaching. He's called me to pass on what he's taught me, what I've learned, and I'm happy to do it, thrilled to do it. But I do it. My interest is in doing that out of a relationship, not out of some kind of dictum of how this is how it's done, follow this, and that's it. It's more, for me, it's more relational, it's discovery oriented. Let's talk about it. Let's discover it. Once we discover it, hey, put on, fasten your seatbelt because you're going to get your chance to take a ride. Enjoy the ride while you're doing it. Take close, meticulous notes while you're doing it because there's something fabulous to learn. That's more my style of teaching. It's much more relational. But in today's world, you know, they've got a label and for everything. And one of the things that I found out during that, probably 15 years is that uh, these sterile systems that are in operation apart from Jesus are great at uncovering the problem to let you see the problem. They're horrible at solving the problem. And so, so many times what I would find is that the people the Lord was connecting me with, they had gone through all kinds of counseling, psychology session. I mean, all kinds of stuff for years and years and years with the great hope and expectation of getting better, only to discover that they were worse because at least before they didn't know what the problem was. You know, now they both know the problem and don't know what the answer is.
Amen.
And so incredible frustration that would grow out of that. And so it was simply, yeah, I get that. Don't expect the leopard to be able to do more than what he's been built to do. So the world operating apart from Jesus only has certain capabilities. And to expect it to perform above those capabilities is to not really understand what's going on. Jesus is the guy who has the answers because he's the guy who built the program. And so, we've said that 1,000 times probably now on these streams, that hey, we can talk about a lot of stuff, but at the end of the day, there's only one, in my view anyway, there's only one opportunity presented and only one solution available. The opportunity is to look at that situation through the eyes of Jesus and to learn how he sees and hears it, what he intends to do about it, and then become a student to learn how he deals with those particular kinds of circumstances. And in every situation, he will then show you how he has built you to be superior to the problem.
Wow.
If you'll just take the time to be a student with him to learn how this thing works. And I've not found an exception to that, by the way. And so when I hear what you're describing is, yep, you've just gone through the process. Friday was pretty cool for you. Saturday was exceptionally cool. By Monday, you were in the middle of it. Guess what? That's the game. And here on Friday, you're going to talk about what it was like and what you learned out of the whole thing. So I'm excited to find out what that's all about.
Well, you just said that one of the most pithy statements here, and I have to say it again. You have been built to be superior to the problem.
Yes.
Will you extrapolate on that? You have been built to be superior to the problem, and that's every problem.
That's every problem. Every problem. Um, it goes back to understanding this, the vision of God and why he created. One of the things we've talked about, I've been astounded for years is we have no clue why God created.
Yeah.
We're given some kind of an answer, but the answer really doesn't make any sense if you take time to step out and actually look at the answer. You know, um, And so, Jesus, why did the Father want to build? I mean, was he a lonely dude? Was he, just looking for something to do? Why did he build? Well, he built this thing, Steve, so that his man could rule his creation with them in the fullness of his nature and character. That's his vision. And so, Steve, if you want to hang with me, that's what I'm about building. That's my mission. And so, if you want to be a part of what I'm doing, that's my mission. Come follow me. That's what we'll do. Well, if you're going to rule, guess what you have to be? Superior to the thing you're ruling.
Wow.
And so, what is the nature of rulership? It is to neutralize what jeopardizes. And so, what do problems do? Well, there are problems that are, I would call them positive, beneficial problems because they are indicating that you're coming up to a limit. And so, guess what you do? If your mission is to grow beyond the limit, you have to be superior to the limit. Well, guess what Jesus says? You could do nothing apart from me. So if you're going to be superior to the limit, guess who you have to be hooked up with? The guy who's superior to the limit, right? Because he's the one who has been given all authority. You see how these things are interconnected?
It's amazing.
And so, yeah, we are built to be superior to the problem. Why? Because we have been created to rule. And so to rule, you must be able to neutralize what jeopardizes.
Okay, let's pause and camp out there. This is huge. You know, what's interesting is I want to be sensitive to the fact that if there's anything I've learned in my just 50 years on planet Earth is that repetition's helpful, because even for me, I've heard this a lot from you, Steve. Whoa, sorry about this. Hang on. I've got my computer going crazy.
Must be getting into something important.
Yeah. No, what happens is when a call comes in, like everything disappears on my screen. Okay, so the repetition of this, even for me, like I want to say it because it's packed with so much, and it's like we often talk about this. Like we could literally talk about this one word or this one idea for hours and hours. So
Yeah.
I want to pause here because it's these big things. You know, I joke with you that I met you and I came in on chapter 7. And it's like I went chapter 6, chapter 8, chapter 5, chapter 9. Like we bounced around, and then out of all of this stuff, we come back into the order of things. And you know what? You just said it. Like the number one thing. You asked the question early on, you're like, why did you create? And it's interesting that out of every church sermon and everything I've ever gone to, no one's ever said, hey, let's take a minute to stop and look around and say, we're in the midst of something.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big deal. I've woken up again to it.
Yeah.
Why is it here?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that would be the fundamental reason. You know, everybody's like, what's the meaning of life? Well, okay, what is it? What does he say it is? And so what you have said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that man would rule his creation, not man's creation, but God's creation with him.
Yes.
In his nature and character.
In the fullness of his nature and character.
In the fullness. Okay, well, that's even better adjective here. Fullness. Okay, so with him. So if we take that and we say, all right, the reason that God created this whole thing that we find every day, at least thus far, I've woken up in the middle of, is so that with him, he wants to basically us to rule his creation with him in the fullness of his nature and character.
Yes.
Okay. So I would just say to anyone that's listening or hearing this, I'd write that down. I just wrote it down. I'm like, write that down. Okay. If in fact there's a God of all creation who's decided that instead of him just running everything, he's using you, right? You gotta, what I get from that is, I got work for you to do, son.
Yep.
That's what I hear out of it. Is that
Yep.
fair?
Well, that's why you got the signet ring. Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So the question is, do you see yourself as someone who has a role to play? I think a lot of people, we're just talking about breathing life into people. I think a lot of people have been beat down so much, and people within this world have told them they're nothing and they're worthless. And I just think about losing all hope and looking at destruction and all the result of people's decision making. And they just like, I have no hope left. And, I see that in just regular life, people who've been so criticized and so beat down and have lost this hope. And what you're saying is, if we go back to the very, very core of this, if you're breathing air and you're above ground, there is a role for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then on the flip side of that, when you're, getting the tar beat out of you and you just can't seem to make it and things are just going the wrong direction and everything seems to be going haywire on you, the same question applies. Learn to step outside of that and say, why is this going on? What is happening here? All I want to do is this, that, or the other. What the heck is going on here? Why is this? Why is every time I attempt to get something done, something pops up out of nowhere and smashes me in the mouth? What is going on there?
Yep.
See, we will say those kinds of things in a woe is me mentality a lot of times, which is just an indication of how badly we've been beaten. But let me tell you what, once you get to the place where you step back and say, okay, what is this going on here? What exactly is happening? Why does whatever it is going on think that I'm such a threat, it's got to beat the crap out of me? What's happening here? See, and instead of taking a victim's woe is me approach, taking a strategic approach to say, wait a minute, hold on just a minute here. Happening once, okay. Happening twice, a coincidence. Happening 3 times, okay, we got a pattern. What's going on with the pattern here? See, we're not taught to think this way.
No.
See, and yet it's the very basic fundamentals that are attributes that are necessary if you're going to rule. You can't, if you're ruling, you can't say, oh, look at that dirty thing that's going on there. Oh, I guess we're just going to have to let it go. No,
Well,
you say, stop.
well, and Steve, that's what I ran into this last week. So let me just share with you how I felt.
Yeah.
I did not feel like I had the ability to step outside of it.
Yeah.
I really didn't. And I want to be honest about that. I mean, you and I were on the phone and I was like feeling like I was going to hyperventilate. I
Yeah.
literally thought I might pass out.
Yeah.
And maybe I would have. I mean, whatever. But that fear and anxiety at that moment and in subsequent times after that, I felt out of control. I felt like I could not, it seems like, hey, that's really easy. Just step outside of it. And I was literally in the midst of this thing going, why can't I step outside of it? And I mean, the things that rush into your head, Steve, the
Yeah.
things that and it's interesting so you made this really good point. This is kind of what I want to direct it to is why?
Yeah.
Why would anyone care about drawing you offsides, getting you into a position where you don't feel like you can back out from it? Because it's like a slavery. It's like you're captive to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I think so many people, you even say, well, there's this woe is me. Well, that's defeat.
Yeah.
You have literally been defeated. And there's a lot of people in this world. I mean, my parents were a lot this way too, would look at the world as saying, well, everyone's out to get you. And that you're literally waiting for the shoe to drop. That
Yeah.
you're just an inch away from devastation. And you can create that future for yourself, even when there aren't spirits going, hey, I'm going to try to jab you.
Yeah.
But when you're in the midst of it and it's overwhelming, whether it's anxiety or fear or anger or all of these things that certainly are not um, of his nature and character, how do you deal with that? And what is, I mean, well, let's start with why. Why there's clearly those within the spiritual realm who believe it's worth their time to keep you from being or doing what you're designed to do, to rule and reign in his nature and character. And we see that as like, I think it's helpful to understand that it's not just I'm mentally unstable. It's that you are in the midst of like an attack. How do you describe that? I want to be able to put it into a scenario in which I can kind of put some handles on it if I can.
Yeah. Okay, let's take the opportunity to give a little background so that when I answer, there'll be just a little bit of context for
Okay.
it. And again, this is one of those things we could spend one or more episodes, dealing with. But um, there is a certain hierarchy within the kingdom of darkness that um, exists because that's how God created the hierarchy of the angelic realm. There is a hierarchy in his creation. It's not like like the way we think of hierarchy. We think of hierarchy as the ones on top get to tell everybody else what to do, and that's not the way it works. The hierarchy is designed to deal with different levels within the creation. Um, and so in in that area, we've heard, if we use New Testament terms like um, evil spirit, um, poneria nomadicus, we hear of unclean spirits. Anyway, these are the lowest levels within Satan's realm, and their express task is to attack people at the base nature of where they live. So they'll attack desires, attitudes, physical traits. Uh, and their whole intention is to get us to the place where we're thinking more about us than anything else. We become the center of the universe. And of course, as parents, we know that, you know, that old adage that eventually you have to tell your children is, hey, you're not the center of the universe. Well, I wonder how many of us as adults has grown out of that point of view, and to my experience, not many of us. But that's the intention. The intention is to make sure we're at the center of the universe because that's how the culture of the world under Satan's rule works. No matter how you package it, man has to be at the center of that. If man is not at the center of that, it doesn't work. And so we can get into that at some point if you like. Um, and so that's how it is designed and structured. So that's part one. Part two, think now strategically. Um, if you were a member um, of the police force, or you were head of the U.S. military, would you send your troops to police or to keep in line your allies or citizens who were law abiding? Is that where you would direct your resources?
No.
No. You would direct your resources to those who are posing a threat, whether they're in the form of nations for armies or if they're in the form of citizens who are rebellious and lawbreakers, at the citizenry level. So my point is that Satan does not dispatch his military resources to people who are not a threat to him. He only, because he has limited resources. So he's going to direct those resources. Okay. Next, so that's second level. Third level, where is he going to direct and to whom is he going to direct? Well, there are going to be people who are in their circumstances because of the life choices they have made. And so Satan doesn't need to mess with you one bit. You're already doing a fine job of screwing up your life. You know, he's not going to mess with you. He may exploit you, he may use you at a point in time, but he's not going to expend any of his precious resources to deal with you. So learning how to step out of a situation, we'll come back to that in just a minute because you and I talked about it on Monday, Beth, is the reason for that in the why is why the heck am I here? Am I here because, and once again, this is kind of the opening introduction to the 60s white paper. You know, am I here because of the choices I made? Because I'm making really stupid choices? And so I'm simply bearing the harvest of the decisions I've made in the past? That this is what I have sown in the field of my life. And so this is what the fruit I'm bearing. And these are really horrible decisions. You know, I should not have taken that gun, that neutral device, and put it in some guy's head and then stolen his wallet. That was a bad decision. And so now I'm in a lot of trouble for that. Well, guess what? This has nothing to do with demonic forces. You're wrecking your life all by yourself. And because you are willing to do that, if necessary, you'll be called upon to act on behalf of and as an agent of that kingdom if it needs to take care of business with somebody. And if you think that's just a philosophical statement, it's because you're not in the game. You don't understand how absolutely real and meticulously involved in human affairs that the kingdom of darkness is. Okay, down to pennies. Now, on the other hand, there are people who are actually trying to get their life turned around, trying to do what's right. They may not even be trying to do anything that Jesus is saying because they've never even been exposed to that idea, but they're still trying to get their life right somehow, some way, and they just can't get there. Well, that's a person who is a truth seeker who represents a very real threat to the kingdom of darkness. And there will be all kinds of things that can come up to deal with that. So thus the need to step back and say, okay, why is this going on? There is a pattern that's happening that I need to observe in order to understand what is happening in my life and what is it that is creating this problem. You see? So the circumstance, not one thing that I've talked about is circumstance oriented. It's decision oriented from the person, from the inside out. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, and that's where creative processes then are released into the creation. All right. And if that is for purposes of good, you represent a potential threat, not because it's good, but because of where that good could lead. Right? We talked about, Whitney, for example.
Yeah.
Right? Whitney's a truth seeker. If she keeps asking the questions she's asking and she keeps on the path she's keeping on, she may be involved in some of the weirdest garbage that the planet can ever muster up. But if she keeps asking the question and keeps seeking what is true, she's going to end up headlong, face to face with Jesus, who's going to say, hey, glad you finally showed up. You want to know more? Would you like to know how this thing actually works? You've been seeking, you're about to find. Are you interested? Okay. Why? Well, that is the intolerable risk that exists for everyone who is actually seeking to do what is true. Okay. So, guess what? Now, as long as we stay in that circumstance, and as long as we only look at the circumstance in the present moment and what it's doing, we'll just be like a guy tied to a pole. We'll just keep running in circles, digging a big old hole, thinking that something's happening or we're trying to get things done, but we're not going anywhere. But the person who will step outside of that thing, even if it's just in the form of declaring I'm stepping out, which, like for you, okay, did you eventually step out?
Yep.
Were you able to in the moment?
No.
What was important, that you weren't in the moment or that you actually ended up outside, stepping outside of it?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I would say the reason you were able to step outside is because you said, I'm going to step outside, whether I feel like I'm doing it now or not.
Yeah. No,
Issuing
that's
a
fair.
decree of rulership.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's
That's
huge.
a long answer.
Well, one of the things we talked about a lot, I've told you many times, I've always been frustrated because I felt like I didn't get any practical, what can I do if I'm in this situation, practical stuff. And if there's anything we talk about, it's the practical, right?
Yes.
Like, hey, what can I do?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to repeat back to you what I heard you say. One of the principal focuses of the system of darkness is to get you to focus on yourself, meaning man-centered, right?
Yeah.
This idea that I'm most important and what I need and what I want is, and I think about that as, displayed as narcissism in some ways. And boy, do we have a an entire scrolling population on phones that are literally feeding that, right? And so, okay, if I can get you to essentially see yourself as separate, right? Because we established at the beginning of this that this idea of with him, rule with him in his nature and character. Okay, so if that's why he created,
Yeah.
then the adversary in the second part you said, why would I direct my resources at someone that's already quote unquote out of the game?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no point. It's already been effectively you're out. And so what I hear you saying in the practical terms is, if I'm just selfishly motivated, I believe that I'm the descendant of a monkey and I am, and this is the best it's going to get. And I just need to get mine. I'll step on your neck to do it. And I'm about amassing these things because if I can convince you that having more money is going to be fulfillment for you, or sex or drugs or whatever it is, or I can get you to the point where you're so beat down that all you can do is self-medicate, you're out of the game. So you're no threat to me. And so I've been effective in you being man centered because
Yes.
you're now not focused on a God centered with him rulership in his nature and character. So you're out. Congratulations, not in the game. The third thing you said is the decisions that you make day to day can get you into a bind. And of course,
Yeah.
there's that term we use from the Bible that is, the wages of sin is death, right? And I was thinking about this is we live with a harvest of these decisions. And the harvest term is great because you talk about a seed,
Yeah.
right? Like I make a decision. Yeah, I decide to take that gun and animate that gun. And I might have justified. I'm like, I think that this is the right reason because I need to get mine and I go and take from you. And of course, you're going to live with the consequences of those decisions. What's really fascinating to me is that so many people who have gotten into really difficult situations find themselves either in prison or at the end of themselves, or like the people who, go through 12-step programs or whatever. They're literally going, all right, I'm acknowledging that this is unmanageable by me. And I think that something really, I mean, this fits so clearly into why that works
Yes.
is because you kind of go, I've been trying to go my own way. And that's my story completely. I was convinced that I had all the skill and ability and talent to be able to take it the distance until I didn't.
Yeah.
And then all crumbled around me and but I had nothing. And it was almost like I had to take all the air out of the room for you to notice that I'm here.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's how it felt. It's like, okay, because if the air's out of the room, you're not thinking about scrolling on your phone, right?
Yeah.
You're looking at how do I get some air. So what I think is incredible about this is you gave this practical application at the end of that. And you asked me that question, like, what did you do and how did you do it? Would you speak about this idea of whether it's verbally or not, telling them to stop? Because what in my mind I see is Neo in the movie when he finally recognizes who he is.
Yeah.
He literally looks around, flexes his muscles, the walls go brrr, right? And you think about who he is. He is the one
Yeah.
that has power over the matrix, the creation. He has a role. And all the agents shoot their bullets and they come slow, and he literally says, no. It seems like what you're suggesting is that functionally actually is true, that you have this ability, and it says, no temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God will give you a way out that you can stand up underneath it, which I think is an amazing like picture. Like whenever you think about standing up underneath like a tent and pushing it up and saying no, is that what you're saying? That you literally, in the midst of this, when you understand, am I operating with him in his nature and character? No, definitely wasn't, Steve. Well, guess what? You can step out and you can say no to this.
Yeah.
What are you saying no to, Steve?
Yeah. Great. For those who have spent any time in church or Sunday school or read the Bible at all, they'll be familiar with the statement that Jesus made to one of the disciples about letting your yes be yes and your no be no, and all else besides is evil, is the way Jesus described it. And so we're basically taught that what Jesus is telling us is that we need to be truthful people. When we say something, we need to mean it. Well, sort of. Um, but when, eventually got, for me personally, it was like, wait a minute, is this one of these Mark IV kinds of situations where he's teaching what appears to be a very basic lesson, but he's got more up his sleeve? Well, what he has up his sleeve when he's talking about this, that the only way you get is by talking to him about it. What did you mean when you said you need to let your yes be yes and your no be no, and all else besides is evil? Duh, that seems pretty flippin' basic. Who doesn't know that? So, what do you got up your sleeve, Lord? What do you think? What were you actually saying? And out of that kind of a conversation, you'll get things like that's just so fascinating with Jesus. You'll start seeing things the way he sees it. Well, Steve, has anybody taught you, or have you ever thought that yes has a purpose and no, likewise, has a purpose? Well, I can't speak for anybody else, but I never got that deep into it,
Right.
you know? And so it's like, well, no, what is it? He says, well, the purpose of yes is to empower so as to mobilize. The
Okay.
purpose of no is to protect. So, and what a person says is evidenced by what they do. So, regardless of what a person says with their lips, their behavior will tell you whether it's a yes or no. If they say no, and yet they're empowering so as to mobilizing the very thing they've said no to, guess what they've actually said? They said yes. I cannot tell you how that simplified my life, in dealing in the business environment and other people that I was around. I stopped listening entirely to what they said. I listened to the extent of their behavior. And we've seen that before, right? Don't listen to what I say, watch what I do, kinds of things. So we have some awareness of this. So when you stand up and you say no to something, what you're doing is you're protecting. You understand that the reason you are saying that is because you are protecting something that is about to be exploited. So in the conversations on Monday, it was no, they don't get to. Remember that discussion?
Yep.
Nope, they don't get to rule. That isn't how this is not how this is played. No, they don't get to rule. Period. What are you doing? You're protecting rulership.
Yeah.
You're not transferring or giving standing to something that is trying to hijack your ability and authority to rule. That's what's actually the game that's being played. They have no standing to rule, and now they're trying to get it from you by getting you to submit to the attack on your emotions so that you'll yield to the emotions. So what is then ruling? Your emotions. No, emotions are very true. They're very accurate. They tell you what's going on. They just don't get to rule. They are granted authority to inform, but they don't have the authority to rule.
Okay, stop there. That's humongous. Okay, so I think this is probably one of the most valuable practical applications, at least for me. You know, I'm a student of personality types, right? And, one of the coolest things about the scriptures, and I've always loved this, is that, there are four gospels.
Yeah.
And it's just so cool in this four gospels. And of course, we hear all the different personalities of the disciples as well. But, right there in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we've talked about this before, but it's interesting that you go back to Hippocrates, which is like the father of medicine, right? If you look back, 3,000 years or whatever, the origins of someone on this planet going, hey, people are different. No kidding. And there were four different kind of personality types of that era, right? Just saying, hey, there's different people. And of course, you see in modern psychology, Carl Jung and others who are like, hey, there's kind of some categories to this. Well, I've been a student of that, and also, paid attention to people in teams, right? And so I think they're good vocabulary to kind of help you understand. But somebody said to me, they said, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
And of course, I always think about here I'm in Central Texas, and, we had football tonight, right? Friday night lights. And I think about these guys that are and we've got coaches like this. And I was at a breakfast this morning for my sons. They finished their season, middle school football. And one of the coach's sons, the coach himself is probably 325 pounds of muscle.
Wow.
And his son, everyone knows, hates football. His son is the biggest kid on the team. And everyone knows that his father is making him play football. And he got up in front and got his little award. And the coach said, everybody knows this boy hates football. And isn't that interesting? His father is making him play football.
Yeah.
And, the example is this: I was in theater all my life. And it's like, your dad is, alpha male football player. And, he, puts a football in the crib and, plays rough with the boy. And then once the boy gets to a certain age, he's like, I just want to dance, Dad. And you're like, right? He's like, okay, so there are different personalities here. And I think what's really cool about the Gospels is we see Matthew, which starts with this lineage, right? It starts with this, hey, we need to connect to historical. If this doesn't connect back to literally Adam himself, right? If we can't tie this back to David, if we can't show that historically that this guy Jesus is the Messiah, you're not going to prove it to me. And so you've got this perspective of a back looking, or historically, you've got Mark, who's as quick and dirty as you get, and then you've got Luke, which is the most fascinating to me. And I've met so many people like this in my life who are very rational people.
Yeah.
And we see them in business a lot. You look at a guy like Steve Jobs and you don't see an accountant. You look at a guy like Steve Jobs and you don't see, honestly, a CEO. You see an artist, a creative. And what's interesting is when I see leadership, I see people who are wired for facts and figures and data. And of course, what does it say? If you look at the introduction to Luke, it's literally, he was commissioned to give the accurate account. And I love it that it's here we have juxtaposed against 3 other gospels, a rational doctor who says, "All right, these bozos, they told you the wrong story. I'm gonna tell you the right story." And it's so classic with those who make decisions based on their thinking.
Yeah.
And then you've got this guy, John. The word became flesh and dwelt among us. I mean, this narrative of all narrative, this journey of hijinks and it's a I mean, it's the greatest, you know, I don't know, supervillain story that exists, right? And what I love about that is that it acknowledges the fact that I'm somebody who loves the book of John, right? I appreciate the scriptures, but I am often led by the feelings and emotions. And I think there are people, whether you're the guy that's like, boy, you're gonna play football, or you're just like, no, I'm on the creative side of this, and I literally wear my heart on my sleeve and I am sensitive. Like Steve, all my life, when somebody was sick, I felt sick.
Yeah.
When I
Wow.
saw someone get injured, I felt injured.
Hmm.
I've had empathy, deep empathy, and I've had to fight it actually because it takes me like if I see an accident on the side of the road, like I literally it's weight on me.
Wow.
And some people are like, maybe you shouldn't have been driving that fast. Like I know people in my life who, if somebody's crying, somebody broke a bone and they've got it sticking out the side of their arm, are like, that kind of sucks to be you.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. I know
No,
people like
I,
that.
I,
I
I do
cannot
as well.
function that way, right?
No.
So to bring this all home, and that was a long example of why I'm justifying my ridiculous behavior, is that no matter how we see the world, God has fashioned us since the beginning, right? Knew us, knit us together.
Yeah.
And there should be no better example with our uniquenesses and our experiences and our differences to understand that if we rule with him in the fullness of his nature and character, and that our yeses and nos are to bless and protect, when we align with that, it's this beautiful thing. But we
Yes.
also have to be guarded. Like, so my buddy who's like, maybe you shouldn't ride a motorcycle, man. But he's dead. Like he's pulled in pieces, and I'm like freaking out. And he's like,
Yeah.
well, shouldn't have drove a motorcycle, buddy. There are people like that. And I go,
Yes.
how can you possibly see things that way? Well, that's how God created people. And you think about it and you go, okay, we need to have these practical tools. And one of the things you're saying, no matter how you're wired, stepping outside of something and letting your yes be your yes and your no being your no gives you the ability to do it with him.
Yes.
And I feel like my emotions that overtake me is the attack of me putting myself at the center, right? I'm going to let these things rule. I've given them permission to make me ineffective.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I've given them that authority.
yes, you have. And by the way, we all do. And hey, listen, this nobody does this stuff on purpose with forethought.
Right.
Oh, okay, yeah, my emotions are going crazy. Oh, it sounds like a good idea to put them in charge. Let's do that. You know, well, we don't think like that. We think we are being empathetic, or we are being concerned, or we're being, you know, true to what's actually happening. I'm not going to be false. I'm going to be true. This is what's really happening, etc. Well, all of that is accurate. What is missing is the realization of what we are called and created to do, which is to be one, to rule with Jesus in the fullness of his nature and character with him, and to be, in order to do that, and when we do that, that we're going to be bigger than the problem. So if there's a problem, my emotions may be informing me about the severity of the problem. They may be informing me about the target of the problem. They may be informing me about all kinds of valuable information that needs to be known and collected, because it's going to support the ruling effort. Well, that's not a negation of the importance and value of the emotions. It is to identify what the role of those emotions are in ruling. So likewise with the person who's much more sterile, there is going to come a point in time where there are circumstances where an incredibly sterile point of view is absolutely essential. Well, guess what? That is a form of emotional expression. I have none. I don't care to have any. I will seal off and cut off any emotional display. This is simply a calculation, and we will deal with it as if it were an equation. 1 plus 1 equals 2. Take away the 1 and you don't have the 2. Okay? You see where I'm going with all of this? It's learning how, whatever it is, however it is that God has built us, that those are to support ruling with him, not to take over ruling apart from him.
Wow.
Which
That's
is the whole
enormous.
exchange.
Yeah. That's enormous. And you think about it, I'm actually glad there are people like that, because when they're actually ruling with him in his nature and character, I want that person in the midst of the wreck.
Yep.
Right? I want that person to say, "Nope, jaws of life, gotta take care of the situation." I got a buddy who's a trauma surgeon, and I'm like, "How in the world do you do it?" And he's like,
Yeah, right
"Dude,
on.
all this plumbing's the same." That's what he says. He's like,
Yeah.
"All this plumbing's the same." I said, "Does it ever like," he's like, "No, I understand how it works and how it fits together." You know, to me, I don't know what a pancreas looks like. I
Don't
just know
want to know.
mine doesn't work so good, but I know that, but he does, and he knows where it is, and
Yeah.
he's seen 100 of them
Yeah.
or 1,000 of them. And I think what's really cool though is that God made people that way, and I'm glad that they are. You know, I look at my wife who's a guardian. That's the terminology I would use for her, and I call her super mom. Why? Because she is concerned about blessing and protecting. I mean, nobody I know makes better decisions than my wife in blessing and protecting children, the family, the institutions of all that, but also, um, it's different. It's different for everyone, and I
Yeah.
think what's so great is what you're saying is universal. It's
Yes.
not based on one personality or another. It's saying, "Hey, understanding who you are and how you can easily be drawn off side." So for me, it's an emotional thing, and I think about football. You know, what are you trying to do with a hard count? You're trying to get the guys off sides. Why? Because I get 5 yards if I've got it. Well, if you wanna come and attack me, Steve, it's on the emotional side of things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think understanding how you're easily attacked or where your vulnerabilities are, I think is a wise thing to consider. But to know that with him and his nature and character, right? This idea of with him, because you said it right. You're just like, you may not have known that you were saying, I need to stop and step out of this, but that is what happened. But it sounds like the more that you understand this and practices it, that you can literally get to the point where you can see it and identify it almost as it's happening. Because I feel like I get overwhelmed by it versus going, oh, it's coming. No. Because I
Yeah.
think that what that would material in my life would be people would be like, hey, wow, you're kind of calm in the storm. And that's what I see in you, Steve. Honestly, I see you calm in the storm. Is that personality or is that practice or both?
Well, it's both, but it's also positional. You know, I'll tell you. I'll just give you a little example. Um, I was going through a really rough time at one time. I mean, I've gone through a bunch of these over the course of my life. You can't be in the game without experiencing some competitive fodder along the way. Um, and so we were going through a really tough time. And off in the distance, I saw this figure off in the distance. And I couldn't make it out, didn't know what it was, but it looked like it was kind of a human form. So way, way off in the spiritual distance. Um, and I looked at it, I watched it, and I watched it, and it started to come toward me. And as it got closer and closer, I recognized it as Jesus. And you go, and he looked exactly the way John described him in Revelation 3, with the eye, with the eyes of fire, and the bronze and the white hair. Looked exactly like that. And I thought, whoa, dude. the, John wasn't just making this stuff up. That is for real. And around him was a swirling whirlwind, um, devastating whirlwind that was around him. A raging windstorm was just swirling around him. And he was at perfect peace in this thing. And so I looked at him and watched him. And so finally, this happened over a couple of days, by the way. So finally, on the third day, I think it was on the third morning, I said, "Okay, Lord, you who are standing in the midst of the raging windstorm, what say you?"
Hmm.
And he said, "Come and stand with me in the midst of the storm."
Wow.
Who says that?
Well, Jesus, clearly. Oh my God.
Wow. Come and stand with me in the midst of the raging windstorm. So I go to my wife. I say, "Marsh, here's what's going on. Here's what's happening. Here's what I asked Jesus. Here's what he said. What do you want to do?" You see the choice that is present? And she said, "I don't think we have a choice. I think we need to say yes." What is the purpose of yes? To empower so as to mobilize. And so he said, "Okay, Jesus, we'll come. We'll stand with you in the midst of the raging windstorm." And so, yeah, it's not only attitude and practice and things of that nature, it's also essentially positioning. He is not just described to be the peace in the midst of the storm. Wherever he goes, the reaction to him, and it's part of this proaction reaction thing we've talked about. Wherever he goes, he kicks up all kinds of reactions around him, every one of which is designed to try to create havoc and fear, to take what is orderly and turn it into disorder. By the way, not because Satan likes operating in disorder, he doesn't. His entire kingdom has to operate with precise order in order for it to function. It's just that he can't produce it because there is no order in him. And so the result of everything is this raging storm that he produces. And Jesus says, "Hey, just come and stand with me."
That's so big, Steve. It makes me think about him turning over the tables. It makes me think about him sleeping in the boat,
Yeah.
and it's like, you say that the swirling windstorm is actually potentially a product of him. That's an interesting, very, very counterintuitive thought for a lot of people. They think of meek and mild Jesus as, sitting with children, petting a lamb and, drinking tea or something. It's like he's passive. And what is interesting about this is all of these lessons that were taught by him when he was here were in the midst of very serious things, right?
Yes.
It seems like, death, storms and all of these things. And it's interesting that you say that because I'm thinking of whatever the challenge may be. It may be life and death, right? It may actually be like hey, we're gonna die in this storm, and why are you sleeping, right? And this is a tool and a means by which you're gonna learn something. It could also be, hey, Steve, you got cancer. And you're like, holy crap! All right, Jesus, do we take this seriously? What do we do? And then you see the smiley face, which I think is so awesome. But it's like, hold on a second. Now I understand. Consider it pure joy, brothers, when facing troubles of many kind. What are those things if they are not opportunities, right? Opportunities to see things from his perspective.
Yeah.
Because in a way, you have no need to be in the center of it if there were no storm.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think that also you'd see, and it makes things like, "Hey, follow me," make a lot more sense.
Well, hey, like I was sharing with you, and Ray when we were joking around a little bit in the green room. Um, it's one thing to sit in the stands and watch Nolan Ryan throw a ball under the chin of somebody and go, "Oh wow, look at that! You just saw what." It's another to actually be the guy whose chin was buzzed by that 100-mile-an-hour fastball. Well, guess what? Guess what your choice is? Your choice is to get in the middle of the storm, or your choice is to observe the storm from a distance. Well, what do you want to do? There's a seat for both of us. What seat do you want to occupy? And, you know, we have made these things so much about ideas and doctrines and teaching lessons and all of this stuff that we have forgotten that when Jesus stood um, in the garden and they came and the crowd, the 300 to 500 people came with clubs and mallets to come take him away, and they said, and he said, "Hey, who have you come for?" And they said, "Jesus." And he said, "I am." And when he spoke those words, it knocked them all back on their butts. Now, what I want to know is who is the guy that thought it was a good idea to get up after being knocked on my keister to think I'm going to take this guy somewhere?
Right.
Who had that idea? It's like, well, wait a minute, guys. Did you just observe what this dude did? He simply answered the question and he knocked all of us on our keisters. What are we doing? Let's pause for a minute, step outside of this situation and say, okay, why are we here? And why did this guy just knock us on our butts? What are we about to get involved in here? We don't do that because the system of darkness works with us being at the center of everything. And so it doesn't matter what happens to us, as long as we remain in the center, it functions. The moment we get out of the center, we're a threat.
Wow.
And that's the game.
It's
Unless you have Jesus standing in front of Pilate.
Yeah.
Don't you know that I have the authority to free you or to crucify you? Pilate, you would have no authority over me if it was not first given to you from above. I would start thinking about why he gave you that authority. And Satan, the guy, hey, and I'm talking to the guy behind you, Pilate. Satan, I would give a second thought to this if I were you. Now, you won't do it because you don't have any wisdom in you, but I would suggest you doing it because there's a whole lot of hurt that's about to happen. The storm, the raging windstorm that you've created around me is about to come home to roost. I'd be careful. No, he isn't. He doesn't know how to be. He has no wisdom in him. And so everything that Jesus does is a parable and a riddle to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Wow.
anyway.
How amazing is that? Well, Steve, this is incredible, and this has been fantastic. Wow. You know what's so neat about it though is it's you mentioned many streams ago, the beauty of the truth is you can probe it.
Yeah.
And you know what I really love about this is no matter how much we talk about this, it seems like its depth is never ending.
Yeah, that
You
is
just
true.
continue to deepen and deepen and deepen and deepen in this. And you know it's interesting what when you told that story, right? Pilate and Jesus, right? And authority, right? A lot of what we're talking about here, it really begins and it's so amazing how it was started with this almost binary thing, right? We hear who is God and it's like I am. And
Yeah.
we talked the other day about computer technology, and I think it was really cool. And we talked about the quantum, this idea of yes. And if you think about a 0 and a 1,
Yeah.
when I am is said, that's 1.
Yeah.
You think about yes, and what did you say a yes is? To
Yes.
empower, to mobilize.
Yeah.
And think about what a yes is. Well, when you create, you say yes. And I was thinking about that. Whatever you make, I like making stuff. I like to draw stuff, I like to carve stuff, I just like to make things, and I very rarely have time to do it. But I just like making things. You know, I love craftsmanship. I love watching a bunch of, weird videos online about people that are sleeping out. Some guy hollowed out a tree and slept in it overnight, or, somebody created this really cool, beautiful, knife that was made out of Damascus, or this craftsmanship of these people that are making samurai swords. And I see in that, yes, I see in this idea of saying, "What you know what's so amazing?" And it's such a separator of who we are from this world. And it's this defining factor of what makes us part of him. And I think about exercising that creative ability. And I just was listening to Richard Hart. So Richard Hart has
Mm.
finally like given us more than just a little bite. He did a 47-minute audio recording and it
Oh,
came
wow.
out just recently. Yeah. And I kind of was listening to it going, I thought Humble Richard was the one that was out now. And anyway, he has a hard time not being proud of himself, but he has been an incredible advocate for a lot of people. And we're in the midst of Sam Bankman-Fried potentially going to jail for life. He's
Yeah.
7 counts, 110 years potential. And, I think about when he says this, he's like, if you want a picture of a pony, you can draw one. And it's such a simple it's such a simple concept of yes. And so when I kind of bring this all the way back to crypto, right? Here on a crypto channel, there's something really cool about what's happening right now in this world. You talk about it as the transfer. But what I'm understanding in this transfer is I think of transfer is it's going to be transferred to me and I'm going to have a lot and you're going to not have a lot. And what in reality of all of this is that, and we talked about this last time, it all starts with me.
Yeah.
And it's really a transfer of my own heart to be aligned with the very nature of why it was all created.
Yeah.
And so it's so interesting because it's so counterintuitive. The whole story of Jesus, right? Well, why didn't you say anything, Jesus? And why did you go to that cross? And what they didn't realize when what an eclipse, an earthquake, and the veil was torn from the top down. What did it usher in? And then him to go into the depths of hell and to be resurrected. This idea that all of these things would change. And I think about it prior to the resurrection. I learning in church, I had a misunderstanding of who Jesus was.
Yeah.
I thought he was just a dude that showed up on the scene. And what I didn't realize was no, all things were created for him and by him. And those that were talking to him prior to him coming is the same thing, that he was almost putting an exclamation point on the purpose of creation to say, you know what, if we're going to do this together, my kingdom come, my
Yeah.
will be done on earth as it is in heaven, well, then you need to have the means to do that. And that means to do it is ultimately, I mean, picture story after story, parable after parable of trying to show you who you are in him.
Yeah.
And you know what's amazing is I was on a call with a guy that I just met, and so many people in this world are like, I'm doing this thing over and over again. I wake up and I do this thing and I don't feel a sense of purpose in my life. I don't feel like what I'm doing and how I'm operating in this world is connected to anything of substance or purpose.
Yeah.
And what I think is so incredible about how you've articulated these things and really given me the vocabulary is to say, let's go back to the very beginning of why it's even here. And then to think about what are the implications of you ruling his creation with him in the fullness of his nature and character. Well, that means that I've got to know what his nature and character is. I've got to like, am I interested in knowing this stuff? And when it all kind of gets packed together with, well, start by recognizing that Jesus is alive and he speaks. And I'm like, wow, if you take all of that and wrap it up, you know what? I go to church and you know what I hear?
What's that?
Jesus is dead and we'll see him on Easter Sunday.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, we're going to worship this Bible.
Yeah.
Because Jesus did some great things. He was a good guy.
Yeah.
But and I don't blame them because that's kind of the routine of the program. But I've always felt like, well, since I was a kid, there's got to be more to this. Look at all these miracles, Steve. Look at all these incredible things that happened over and over again. And it's like, as you probe this truth and realize it, you're like, okay. It's like this church thing for me was just an appetizer, right? It was just, I mean, without it, I wouldn't have paid much attention. Now, you could say I might have just because of the nature of how this is created, but I'm thankful for it. And I'm thankful for a number of people in my life who came through that kind of church experience who actually took an interest in me and said, hey, and spoke into my life. But this whole deal with you, and I mean, there's more growth, I think, in my kind of spiritual life in the last year than in the last 23 years. And that's big. That's a big deal because what is it? Because it actually has practical application now. It's not a religious idea or, hey, it's no, I'm aligning myself with like how it's actually designed. And if I look at anyone in science, anyone in technology, what are they trying to do? Everything I see them creating is mimicking the creation.
Yeah.
If it has any value, it does.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you, Steve.
Well, thank you, Lord. I mean, he's a man who's true to his word, and if he says follow me, then it's worth it.
So I want to do something different. I just had
Okay.
a little quinky dink here.
Okay.
Anyone that's in the chat, any question that you have, let's ask Steve it. Okay. Anything that you're like, I've been watching these things, but I still don't understand this, and nothing is off base. Nothing is out of bounds. You can ask absolutely anything, and I won't make fun of you because Brandon's not on the stream. He'll make fun of you. No, he's in the chat. It's so good to see Rags here. But no, seriously, if you got a question, you're like, hey, what do you think about this? Or I've always had a hard time understanding this thing that happened. Or what do you say about, I don't know, whatever it is. For example, well, I don't even want to insert anything. So I want to leave space for people to ask that question. And so it's open. The chat is open for any question that you would want to ask of Steve while we've got him here for another 30 minutes. By the way, my father-in-law is super happy about the Rangers winning. And I'm happy for him. He's been, what was it, the Washington Senators? Is that what it started out as?
Yeah.
And then became the Rangers. He has literally been a fan since moment one. And I'm just so happy for him that he got to see it. It's baseball. It's not life, but it's so cool. Did you get a chance to watch the series?
Yeah, I did, and it was fun to watch. I mean, I think it was maybe game 4. They showed, speaking of the Senators, Frank Howard. They give a little memorial to him. because he had passed away, I think, at that day.
Hmm.
And
Oh yeah.
and I remember Frank when he came up with the Dodgers playing in right field. This mammoth of a human being who was 6'7" in those days. I mean, he was every bit of 5 inches taller than than anybody else on the field. So, okay, Steve, do you think you would have played well under Billy Martin if you had played for the A's in 1980? um, Great question, ID. Yes, like any player, um, for 3 years. Billy had a shelf life of about 3 years, and he was a fabulous manager year 1 through 3. Then, in about 4, he started to become the center of the universe. Um, in year 5, he started to being the black hole that started sucking everything into him. And if he made it to year 6, he would lose the clubhouse. And so, yeah, I think I would have done really well under Bill. I tell you a little story. ID, since you like asked a question about Billy. Friend of mine, we were best friends growing up. He was the shortstop uh, for the Boston Red Sox, Rick Burleson, back in those days. He was one of the early shortstop in those days. Uh, uh, Top guys went to the Angels before he blew his arm out, but he played for Billy, and he was telling the story. He was telling the story of there was a game. They had a game, and they were beating this team. I forget who it was, and they were up like, 10 or 12 to nothing. And in the last inning, the other team scored about 4 or 5 runs. Game over. Everybody's in the clubhouse and, celebrating and high fiving and stuff like that. Well, Billy came into the clubhouse and started throwing stuff all over the clubhouse, throwing chairs and turning tables and screaming like a madman to the team. And one of the guys stopped and said, "Hey, Billy, what are you doing? We just won 12-4." He said, "No, you didn't." He said, "You were winning 12-0. You should have put your heel in their neck, but instead you gave them life, and tomorrow they're going to come back and they're going to beat your ass." And guess what the team did? Came back and beat them. That was Billy Martin, and why he had such a fabulous impact the first couple of years, 2, 3 years with a team. But
Wow.
no, I think I would have done well
That's awesome.
for
That's
3 years.
awesome. Yeah, for 3 years. Crypto Pez, thanks for being here. Need to go back for the juicy bits. Friday nights in Spain are not the same without you two. That's so nice to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Crypto Pez, and thanks for being here. David Lee asked this question. I'm going to add to this question, Steve, because I think I know what he's saying, because I hang out with David Lee on occasion. He says, Steve, what do you think about is the purpose of this awakening and gathering? Sorry if too broad. I think what Steve is saying too is David Lee and I have experienced this because he's followed everything we've done in this whole Right Side Up series. I've talked about you a ton. He was, he's been part of this since the moment that, we had the Texan meetup. But even broader than that, David Lee has recognized what's been happening with us as a team. And I told you that story about the Lord saying to me, "I've hidden something in the house for you."
Yes.
And it's behind you. Like I haven't had that kind of like direct, clear stuff. And to find that Xanax bottle with state quarters in it, and how impactful that was for that next step for us, because that's what actually led the decision making for doing the whole Texan thing. We had 2 opportunities, and it was like, which one do we do? And it's like Michael says, "Hey, ask him." Right? That's basically what he said. Ask him. And what did he say? "Hey, I'm going to show you this thing that's going to be a picture of this." And that picture was, hey, the money is going to attract a lot of people. And what is the purpose of them being attracted to this thing? Well, they think that this man-made creation of money is going to bring them or anesthetize them and bring them peace. But don't forget that it's actually a man-made creation that is a temporary fix. David and I have seen that there is this awakening, it feels like, right?
Yes.
What are we talking about? I said to you before, Lord, should I preach the gospel? And he's like, no. And now it's like, no, this, you need to understand what the real gospel is. It actually is good news if it's this.
Yeah.
So what do you, I know that's really broad, but there seems to be an awakening and a gathering of God's people, and it's not church people. We talked about that.
Yeah. And I'll take both those, both the question as well as your money inside the, inside the Xanax bottle, and just offer you a couple of thoughts.
Yep.
A little bit ago, I mentioned about the culture of the world, and wherever you have a gathering of people, they not only possess but then express the life source that is present within that group. In a company, when in my consulting days, I used to share with folks that the most valuable thing that we possess as a company is not our product, not our service, not our money, not our position, not our market share. It's the culture that we produce that is the unspoken, invisible reality of who we are as a company. And when a person comes out of the elevator and walks into our presence, the very first thing they'll be impacted by is our culture.
Right.
And they won't know what it is. They don't know why it is. But eventually you'll start hearing them say things like, wow, I came in, I always feel so welcome when I come here. Folks are always so cheerful. Oh, when I see people walking by, they've always got, this look of determination and satisfaction on their face. They'll tell you what it is that the culture is producing that you haven't spoken a word. But this comes from the inside out. Well, the culture of the world is the way Jesus calls the culture of the world. He calls it spiritual ether. And the picture that he showed is like, we're in a hospital bed with this IV in our arms, and we're nearly half, groggy and half asleep. And that spiritual ether is designed to keep us in a semi-state of slumber. We can't be totally asleep because then we're no use as slaves, but we have to be kept enough asleep in order to not really understand and be sensitive to what is happening in the spiritual dimension of life, spiritual ether. Well, guess what you have? You have a container, a bottle, with something that anesthetizes, and inside of it are coins. And so what the part of that picture is money is used to keep us bottled up in this spiritual ether. And so the objective is to release the tool from the spiritual ether so it can fulfill its divine purpose. Okay? And you've been entrusted with that. And the way that the Lord describes it to you is unlocking global generosity. Well, guess what you have to do? And you also use the term letting the genie out of the bottle. All of these terms are describing that idea of releasing the cap of the spiritual ether and freeing the resources to perform their divine purpose.
Wow.
Okay, but you got to free them from the spiritual ether.
Unlock it.
Unlock it. See, so that generosity can flow, so the creation can do what it does, which is to produce abundance. All right. Now, awakening in about, I think it was sometime in about 2017. I'll have to go back and look at it. I actually sent out an email to a number of folks about it. Carter may remember it. If Joe is on here, Joe may remember it. There are a few folks that might remember this, if they may be on the stream or not. But anyway, what I saw this massive body of people, and they were all in this state of slumber. But all of a sudden, there was this movement that began to happen, this shake, and they started to shake, if you will, not violently, but they began to move and start. And what you could tell is they were starting to arouse from sleep. So when I hear awakening, that's what I relate to. That Jesus said, hey, I am arousing my people. They're getting ready to move, but I have to awaken them before we can actually mobilize to our destination. And so when I see awakening, that's when I hear things like awakening, that's what I hear. Okay, we're waking up. Now, how does God wake us up? Well, there are these little things called alarms. I remember, for example, uh, when Clinton was elected, and when he was elected president, he was elected in spite of things that in normal elections would have, canceled him out in 15 minutes. In fact, you've seen a lot of other subsequent, not only previous, but subsequent candidates who had his trouble that, I mean, they didn't last 15 more minutes once it came out. But yet for him, he came out, and not only was immune to it, ended up being elected president not once, but twice. So I said, Jesus, what in the world is going on here? How can this actually happen? And he said, Bill is my alarm clock. He will be the first to awaken my people. And so I started thinking, alarm clock, what's that? And I didn't think much about that until I realized that an alarm clock is violent to the one who's sleeping. So part of this awakening that we're going through is we are experiencing some violence in the form of the alarm clock that is shaking us and waking us up out of this spiritual ether that has got us in a spiritual state of slumber to waken us up so that we can then begin to collect and move into our proper role and perform that role with Jesus and each other. So that's very broad, but that's what comes to me through the question.
That's fantastic. And that's super helpful. And boy, it's amazing, right? We started this whole thing talking about breathing life, right? And we started out like, has anyone ever like said, "Hey, you can do it"? And you just did that for me, Steve.
Wow.
No, you really did. And it's, I think a lot of times, whether it's suffering in silence or thinking in kind of solitude, is that the true things get reinforced, right? So one of the things that's interesting is, most people don't see this on stream, but we have a lot of conversations outside of streams, of course, and a team of people. And this whole calling of unlocking global generosity has morphed and has grown and it has become more substantial. But every time I ever talked about it and used those terms there's always been real intrigue and interest.
Yeah.
And probably no other three words that I've ever spoken that haven't had such an impact. And it leads you by the wrist, if you will, in a direction. And I can't help but think that this idea that all these stories that Jesus told about, hey, I'm a shepherd and the sheep recognize my voice. And it's amazing. I've been thinking about, how do you share this stuff in less than 2 hours? Right? Like, I've been thinking about this going, hold on, this is something that, you think about shouting it from the rooftops. I now understand why Paul walked around the Mediterranean 4 times.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it now. I mean, I understand it. Well, because he understood this. But what happened to him? Think about this. He literally was blinded. So
Yeah.
one of his sensory functions is gone and he hears from Jesus.
Yeah.
That's an amazing idea and story. But how amazing that when you hear from and you think of that journey. What did Paul do? And what did it cause him to do? And you think about what that yes is of mobilizing and, you know, empowering. That's what I think is so incredible about this time that we're living in is I feel like Jesus is saying yes to
Yeah.
us. And what is the yes to? Um, to me, I can think of nothing greater than having a sense of peace that transcends all understanding that I can't even describe, that is packed with purpose
Yeah.
and like a trajectory. Like, hold on, you mean like I matter?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people that are out there who go, and I often bring this up on my streams. I go in and I get a soda in the morning. I get a soda,
Mhm.
and always there's somebody in front of me who's got 2 20-ounce beers. It's like 7:30 in the morning. And my dad was an alcoholic, so I understand. I understand that whole thing. But I think about, self-medicating and what it means. It's like so many people in this world, whether they're medicating or not, often think that, hey, this world and the way that it's being led is being telling you that this is the best it's going to get and you just need to endure it. And it's like you're the descendant of a monkey, you crawled out of the ooze, and you're just here for a short time. And you're going to die and turn back into dust, and people are going to forget your name.
Yeah.
Um, what do you say to people who are there, who are feeling that way, that have no hope?
Well, I mean, it's a thing that we talk about all the time. Go to the guy who's got hope, you know, and kind of seems like a pretty simple approach. It's like the guy who was asking me about, all the business. Where did I come up with all the business ideas and concepts that he had never heard, so he could go read about it and learn about it himself? And I said, well, the guy who built business. If you want to know about business, go talk to him. He's happy to share. And he's got ideas about business that just blow your mind. Again, that seem backwards, but they're only backwards to the upside down world. The right side up world is what is perfectly normal.
Yeah.
um, it's interesting you were talking about awakening. Well, what happens, what is the implication to awake? What is the previous state before awake? Isn't it asleep?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you were, let's just call him out. If you were Satan and the head of his kingdom, and you knew that that what was happening is that there was a rustling and a rumbling among those who really want to know and follow Jesus and to learn how to live with him, and they have been asleep and they're about to awake, awake, awake. How would you feel about that? And you knew every single one of them had the capacity to do what we were talking about on Monday, that in the midst of the most intense attack on you, all you needed to do was say, nope, that isn't where we're going. That isn't what we're going to do. That's a no. What I am going to do, which is a yes, is I'm going to step outside of this thing and look at it for what it really is with Jesus, to get an idea how he's seeing this thing.
Yeah.
How would you feel if you were Satan? And more importantly, how would you feel about all those people, all those other angels who bought into his program? Hey, let me tell you what, they're terrified and they are scrambling like crazy because they know we're about to awake.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's funny you say that. So Hexter is here, right?
Yeah.
I thought at first that this question was a joke, but it's not a joke. And so he says, "What was Christ?" And he's like, "I'm not religious, so I don't know." And I think it's really cool. So Hexter, one, welcome, and thanks for asking the question. I mean, there is no question that is out of bounds on this stream. That is for sure. So if you were to say to someone, he's like, "Hey, what was Christ?" What was this? We use this term. It's like even, you kind of think about it. I think it's a pretty really genuine question. Hey, is this
Yeah,
guy's last name Christ? Like, what does
yeah,
that mean when you say the Christ? And you think about people saying, well, you are the Christ. What does that mean?
yeah. That's great. Um, it comes out of the, of course, part of that era. And remember, in that era, there were not the governments. There weren't governments like we see them today. They were just starting to form. They were kingdoms, and so kingdoms had kings, and so kings were initiated um, into their role. So in the Hebrew um, history, they were anointed with oil. And so this oil was a picture of the saturation of the Spirit of God over the primary leader that he was presumed to have appointed over Israel. So the whole idea of anointing was the pouring of oil, which was a representation, again, of the Spirit of God that then saturated from the head, the mind, all the way down. And then guess what it would do? Touch the eyes, the ears, the mouth, go over the entire body, so that the king was viewed as being um, the anointed and selected by God to rule his people. That's why David, in the story between David and Saul, David said he would not touch the Lord's anointed. Say why? Because he was saturated with the Spirit of God and was appointed, and as God appointed him, so God was the only one who had the authority to remove him. Okay, there's the picture of staying inside and working with God versus outside, which the whole book of Kings and Chronicles are about how people on the outside took matters in their own hands to kill God's anointed. So that's where the anointed concept comes from. The word Christ is the Greek word for anointed one. And so if you were to translate that into English, it would be Jesus, the anointed one. And so that anointed one, Christ, was an indication that he was the one that God had deposited in him the fullness of his spirit in order to rule his people. And of course, that then you see in the story of Jesus meeting up with John the Baptist, how the dove descended on him, from heaven, like the Spirit, and it said, and then you heard the voice out of heaven, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." So, extra, that's a lot of information around that if you ever want to get to it. But Jesus's name, the Christ, or Christ, means the anointed one, which indicates that he was the specific one to whom God had deposited all authority to rule.
So let me ask you this. I'm curious about this one. We look at the term and we hear the concept of the Messiah, right?
Yeah.
And I've been paying attention to this whole Jewish conflict too. And you know, somebody was with what's his name, Ben Shapiro, and it was somebody that didn't. I think it was Joe Rogan actually asked him, and he asked him who is Jesus to Ben Shapiro,
Hmm.
this practicing Jew, and um, he kind of was stumbling over that one, but he was like, well, he was a guy that they killed, this leader he killed. And who and what where does the term Messiah fit into this concept, Jesus the Anointed One or the Christ? How would you place Messiah into that? Because people were looking for one, they were anticipating one who would come.
Yeah. Um, Messiah is work. I guess you could describe it as chosen one. Um, Christ, the Greek word Christos is used to translate Messiah, anointed one, chosen one, and so that concept comes out of the Hebrew scriptures that God sends a Messiah um, upon whom the government of the kingdom of God on his shoulders rests. And so it speaks primarily of one who is specifically chosen by God. And in the New Testament, that is then, let me back up. And so the idea behind within the Hebrew context is that the Messiah would come and then deliver Israel from all of its entanglements with the world and all of those that were attempting to beat down the world, and then position Israel as the primary ruling kingdom on the earth. And so the Messiah is this chosen one who was to come from God, who was to actually assume that position in order to restore to Israel their primary position of ruling the earth, with God. That's where Messiah comes from. What's interesting is that the first one to be identified as God's Messiah was Cyrus, a heathen king. He was the first one to be called God's anointed, God's chosen. And so I don't know how you reconcile that, but other than God has his anointed ones, his chosen ones that he works with to accomplish certain things. And Cyrus was the first one to be identified with that. What's also interesting is you were talking about Luke. Well, the second book that Luke wrote was Acts. And when you go into the first couple of verses of Acts, the disciples asked Jesus, is it at this time that you are going to restore the kingdom to Israel? Well, why was that? Because they recognized Jesus as being the Messiah. So now their religious training was telling them that the Messiah was there to restore the kingdom to Israel. And Jesus says, man, how long I've been with you? You still don't get this thing? So that's what relates to, this whole Messiah. And the point is that when you look through the lens of scripture to view everything, you're going to get a distorted view. You're going to view that through your own belief system, as opposed to talking with Jesus, who then shows you his perspective on the scriptures, and then you get his view on them. If the Jews killed Jesus, why do Christians support Israel so much?
What a great question.
Rock on, Hex.
Right on, man.
Well, the simple answer, without going into a whole lot, is that it goes back to the time of Abraham. And Jehovah said to Abraham, those who bless you, I will bless, and those who curse you, I will curse. And so for those who bless the seed of Abraham, I will bless them. Well, Jesus comes from the seed of Abraham. And so Christians view Jesus as being the fulfillment of the seed of Abraham. And so their role is to support Israel, which was the lineage, if you will, the national lineage through which Jesus then came. So Christians, by and large, not all of them, but the overwhelming majority are, I would say, are highly supportive of Israel, because they also view Israel as being a timing mechanism for the second coming of Christ, when the huge portion of Israel is then comes to the Lord and recognizes Jesus as their Messiah. So there's a lot connected into that. But great question.
Very good question. Okay, I've got a curveball. Maybe it's
these haven't been.
maybe it's a knuckle slider.
Knuckle curve.
Yeah, something like that. Okay. This idea of what is Israel, right? So, because I follow Hexicans on Twitter, I have all kinds of stuff in my feed. And one of the things that's in my feed that I see a lot of times is what is Israel? And so some of the conspiracy folks would say, hey, this current day political Israel is a corporate creation of the Rothschilds, right? I'm just saying what I've read. I haven't spent much time there. One of the things that I'm really curious about is because we see deception so often in this story of it kind of you thinking it's this, but it's really this, and it's actually kind of set up to deceive you. That we think of the political organization and the fact that the map says Israel on it, that is what Israel is.
Yeah.
And of course, I think about Jesus talking about, this temple is going to be torn down in 3 days. And they're like, what? This thing's been here. And what, how is that possible? And of course, we understood he was talking about his body himself. How much, do you have any commentary on this idea that understanding Israel as something much broader than the political current, and I don't mean just borders of land, but the political apparatus of Israel versus what Israel is really? Do you have any thoughts on that? I don't want to. I mean, that's my best knuckle slider curve.
Well, you're worth a lot of money if you can throw those.
Yeah, all
on the
together.
mound. Let me tell you what. I'll just offer a couple of thoughts. Okay. Israel was the name that God gave Jacob. And so remember our discussion on naming rights. The one who names has authority over the one named. And the one who accepts a name comes under the authority of the one who gave the name. And so the picture we kind of painted in order to try to make it really simple is with our children. We have children at home. Who names our kids? Do the grandparents name our kids? Does the neighbor down the street? Does the president of the United States? Who names our kids? Well, we name them. And so when we name them, under whose authority do our children fall? Well, they fall under our authority. And then it's our responsibility to grow them up, to bless and protect them, exercise the authority that God has given to us to bless and protect, nurture and raise them until the day comes when they separate, from mom and dad's care, the ones who name them, to then go and, join themselves, to their mate and start the process all over again. Okay. So that's naming rights. So what God did with Jacob is he renamed him Israel. Well, Israel means he who contends with God. And so when you look at that, you go, oh, that could mean he who contends with and alongside of God. It also can mean he who contends in opposition with God. Well, guess what? That's our choice.
Yeah.
We are either going to contend with God as a partner with him, or we're going to contend in opposition to him, which James says is the assignment of those who fall in love with and are friendly with the world. Okay. They are literally assigned to become an enemy of God, to contend with him. So, who is Israel, number one? Well, Israel can be either those who contend against him as an enemy, or those who contend with him as a partner. And guess what? They're very hard to distinguish because they can look exactly alike, just like the two watermelons on the shelf.
Yeah.
And how do you discern between the two?
Lookalikes.
They look alike. How do you discern between the two? So that's the broader macro kind of thing that then relates to the individual. Well, who are you? Are you the Israel that contends with God as a partner? Or are you the Israel that contends against God as an enemy? The choice is yours. Okay. Now, from there, you can go into all the political things that then go off from there. See, and now the ripple starts to flow out of the rock being dropped in the pond.
Steve, you are a blessing to us all. You know what is so great? I haven't run into a question where you didn't have like a major aha. What a beautiful description. And what I love about it is, I think Joe said this. He's like, yeah, listening to Steve is like, He talks how I think Jesus would talk, and it's evidence that you've been hanging around the guy for a long time,
Yeah.
and it's so cool, and I long to be the same, I long to and it's beautiful. That was, like, one of the most beautiful things I've heard you say, and it's, of
Mm,
course, you relating this, but what a great end cap on what we're doing here. I mean, it's like the absolute perfect, wrap up of all this stuff. Are you gonna do it with him? Or are you gonna do it against him? And I stand here going, and ever since I decided to do it with him, it's a constant daily thing.
yeah.
And what's fascinating about all of this is, Ray and I spend probably the most time together talking about Jesus. Even though I talk a lot to you, Steve, we contend with him in this way around these things every single day. And it's incredible the impact that you've had on our lives by just reminding us to ask him ourselves. And this idea that in order to actually consider that as an option, I have to recognize that he's alive.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
I ask him, I have to recognize that he speaks to us. And I've said it many times. I don't hear him audibly, but boy, I'm seeing him in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing journey. And it's not without its attacks too. That's the thing that I think this whole stream is establishing. But thank you for giving vocabulary to and kind of tools to say, hey, and you said I'm going to read what I wrote, and it's so worth saying like 100 times. You have been built by him. You have been built to be superior to the problem. And if you think about this idea of standing with him in this whirling storm where there is peace, and that you are the Israel that is partnering with him, that he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. And the question is this: if you're above ground breathing air, there's purpose and work for you to do. And what I love about it is it makes every single difficulty, every single experience I've had like come together as useful in this next day.
Yes.
And Ray and I have said this many times. It's like, I don't know if it's a church or if it's a lie or what it is, but the joke I make to him is like, well, I got saved with 1989. I'm like, you know what? I had to go back to him today, this morning, and I was thinking about give us this day our daily bread. And I was thinking about the manna that they'd never seen before, and they're like, "Hey, here's provision for us." It's like day by day, moment by moment thing, and I think we've been lied to say that, "Well, you got your fire insurance." And I just thank you for that. I really do, because when you said to me the first time you said to me, and you've said it probably 100 times to me, name a person in your life that you have a relationship with that you don't talk to. And I was thinking about a book, Steve.
Yeah.
This book is called Jesus is Alive and He Speaks by Steve Staggs. That's the first line of the book. It really is. Name a person in your life that you have a relationship with that you don't talk to.
Yeah.
I'll wait. I'll wait. Thank you, Steve, for all that you do. Thanks for this. This is number 28, folks. I appreciate you so much, Steve.
Thank you. Likewise. And folks, have a great weekend.
All right, we'll catch you in a minute. Whoo! Once again, God sees you out the corner of his eye. I love this stuff. This is so great, isn't it? It's refreshing. It is refreshing, and the generosity of Steve to give of his time, and then you see him in the zone, right? You ask him a question, it's like he kind of looks up, and it's like bam, and it's so nice that God has designed it this way. That there would be those who would be willing to be generous with their time to share these things with us. But what is he doing? He's not trying to say, "Hey, look at Steve." He's saying, no, look at Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, the one in which we partner with. And if you want to have peace in your life, well, this isn't a religious thing. This is, hey, you got some interest? Well, this is how this thing's made. And having that perspective, it's powerful stuff. And that's why I do this, folks. I do this because I want you to know that There's real life in this journey, and don't give up. I was in a really, really tough place this last week. I mean, really tough place, and I was listening to some things that were not good. And I'm sure so many of us get into these situations like that where we're just listening to all of the lies. And I just would say to you, do not give up. There is hope. And in the midst of all this whirling, swirling wind that Steve talks about, there's going to be a lot of chaos and crisis. But we're going to stand and have a perspective and partner with the one who created it all. I'm excited about what that means, especially because you've been drawn to this thing. And it's so fundamental, the resources, right? Not that we would worship money, but that it would be unlocked and released in this world. And to see crypto and what it's done and what it could do, imagine if it was animated with the very nature and character of God himself. Have a great weekend. Take care of yourself and don't mess with Texas. Take care, everybody.